Hi, Eddie.
Good afternoon, Jeff.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me for a 1 o'clock news conference today. I wanted to be able to have a separate discussion on the events of last night, and I'm joined by Colonel Bill Bryant, the Director of the Arkansas State Police. And first, I wanted to emphasize that last night, as we've seen in previous nights, we had extraordinary peaceful protests by good citizens of Arkansas, and not just in Little Rock, but also in Fayetteville and other places across Arkansas. And also, as we have seen in other evenings, that as the night progressed, that there are certain elements that took their actions into their own hand and destroyed property and have in times committed acts of violence as well. As I indicated yesterday and on previous occasions, we will not tolerate the destruction of private property and the potential or the expression of violence. We want to make sure that we protect peaceful protest, but we also want to make sure that we have an environment that people are safe in their persons and in their property. And so yesterday, of course, as I have activated the National Guard so that they can support local law enforcement, I signed an executive order that is always done anytime you activate the National Guard, and it sets up a unified command structure. I want to emphasize that this unified command structure recognizes the individual agencies and their line of authority. And so the Sherwood Police Department participated in the unified command yesterday in our operations, and they of course report up to the Chief of Police. Here in Little Rock and North Little Rock, it reports up to the Chief of Police and to the Mayor. That line of authority continues. It is simply that we work together with a plan, and then the orders go out through those different agencies, and that respected chain of command that we respect with the city and with the municipal law enforcement agencies. All of this is the result of the tragic death of George Floyd. And as I've mentioned before, this is inexcusable. It cannot be tolerated. I am pleased that they have brought homicide charges. I expect more charges to be brought in that case, as they should be. And it causes everyone that loves law enforcement and appreciates what they do in public safety to look within ourselves and say, is there something we need to do better? Is there a dialogue that we need to have? Do we need to do more listening? And the answer is certainly we do. And I've started that conversation with members of the community, and I'll continue that conversation. And I want to hear about how we can do better, how we can make sure that we are providing equal justice and that we are not providing any discriminatory law enforcement actions. Last night, we had a combined force of 9 different federal, state, county, and municipal law enforcement agencies that participated in the protection of the protesters and making sure they can exercise their rights and at the same time protecting property. Their goal was to keep the peace, protect the free expression of protesters, and, as I said, to prevent violence. This is done through the unified command that respects the chain of command of each different municipality that participates. And I want to say thank you to the law enforcement agencies that did their job last night. They put themselves at risk. They act with restraint. And as you can see, last night the law enforcement agencies saw the peaceful protests at the Capitol. The curfew came at 8 p.m. and then after the curfew ended, the protesters continued, and they moved to the mansion where there were hundreds of protesters there. There was not any police action. It was respectful, even though it was in violation of the curfew. It was only when certain elements went to destroy property that law enforcement moved in as they have the responsibility to do. And I mentioned that they endanger themselves. This right here is a rock, but this is used as a weapon on Monday night against law enforcement, and I'm going to put it on the table, and I hope that each of you will take it. It's not the pebble that you throw into the creek and skip rocks with. This is a weapon, and I hope that you will take a notice of that. That's just an example of what they have to exercise restraint through that kind of elements that challenge them. When I talked about the law enforcement agencies, it was the Arkansas State Police, the Little Rock Police Department, the North Little Rock Police Department, the Sherwood Police Department, the Pulaski County Sheriff's Department, the Arkansas Highway Police, Arkansas Game and Fish, FBI, and DEA coordinating together. And as they moved, as the protesters moved away from the mansion through Broadway, then it started to disintegrate into illegal behavior and destruction of property. If you'll put the first collage up here, this is the McDonald's on Broadway. I hope that you can see it, but you can see obviously, one, that there is a large stone that's taken away from here that presumably was thrown through the window and broke the glass of the McDonald's. There might be another picture of this, another picture of it with the stone laying down in the front. Whenever law enforcement sees this, that is their mission. Their mission is to stop this kind of destruction of property, and so that's when law enforcement started to respond, and they made 79 arrests last night. All of these were of Arkansas residents, I might add, but Colonel Bryant will have more to add to that. And so, again, I applaud the protesters in the way they behaved, but there is a certain element that once the nightfall hit, they were looking for an excuse both to destroy property but also confront the police. In fact, that became their design, is to confront police. And that's whenever, with that destruction of property, the police moved in. I think they did their job last night. I look forward to a continued conversation. I also want to assure everyone that if they decide to continue the protest, then law enforcement will be there to protect them, to make sure that they have access to exercise their rights, which is so important in our society, and is an important time to listen and to be able to express the frustration and anger and distrust that is in so many's heart. And so that we respect, and we'll protect them, but we also will protect the property to make sure that doesn't happen again. And as you can see, last night on Capitol Avenue, that was almost a large amount of property damage was done the night before. That was not happening last night, and I thought it was a successful operation. Colonel Bryant, I applaud you and your team on that. I invite you to come and make your comments.
Thank you, Governor. Before we get started, I'd like to take this opportunity. Just last time I was up here, I didn't get a chance to talk. I was mostly answering questions, but this is my 44th year in law enforcement, and I really believe law enforcement is a calling. And I too applaud Governor Hutchinson as well as every professional law enforcement officer in the state of Arkansas that the treatment of Mr. Floyd and his death is just totally unacceptable. It's detestable. Any law enforcement officer who is a professional will tell you that. Our job is to protect and serve the citizens of Arkansas. The core values of the Arkansas State Police is integrity and character. And what served me well is when I talk to other law enforcement agencies or teach classes, you treat everybody with dignity and respect. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, young or old. I still say yes sir, no sir to young adults. That's the way I was raised, but what served me well over 44 years, you treat them with dignity and respect, and then you usually get dignity and respect back. But again, as far as last night, the peaceful protesters, as long as it remained peaceful, we were there to protect them. Even after the curfew, they went over the governor's mansion, and I was advised from my troopers, they were advised, hey, that you were in violation. We took no enforcement action. They left the area. And the triggering event is when they threw the large stone through the McDonald's. After that, we were able to, means like Facebook Live, but they were chatting. It's time, for the confrontation with the police. They proceeded down Broadway to the area of the Pulaski County Courthouse, and at the time the decision was made to go ahead and move law enforcement elements in. And as you can imagine, it was kind of a chaotic scene because the protesters attempted to flee. And so it was pretty chaotic, knowing what we already knew that they've done, have broken the windows and threatened that, it's time for confrontation with the police. But we tried to do the best we can. We detained those people for officer safety until we could get the scene back to a calm manner. As a result of taking the subjects into custody last night, we seized 2 Glock 9mm. The protesters were armed, and they were booked with obstructing governmental operations. But, what I want to do the other day, y'all asked us questions about the media and about, the steps and what we've taken. But just to give you a general idea, for like the Saturday night protest, before we reached the Capitol or we approached the Capitol, they were firing weapons in the air. Here are the 4 cartridges, and I'll be glad to put that on the table and let y'all look at that. The first measure was they blocked the interstate. We were able to move them with voluntary compliance. And that was great. They went back to the Capitol. That's when they started destroying the Capitol. We had vehicles doing donuts in the Capitol grass. The Capitol Police got bottles thrown at them and rocks as they tried to move their vehicles. So at that point, a decision was made to go ahead and we were going to disperse the crowd. While we were en route to the crowd, they got back on the interstate. Again, we approached them and sought voluntary compliance. They were immediately shelled with rocks. At that time, we deployed crowd control measures. They went back up to the Capitol, and as we continued to try to do that, I think these cartridges where somebody's in a vehicle got a 9mm and was shooting in the air. So we were meeting violence. We were met with violence. We'd rather have voluntary compliance, believe me. I've been around 44 years. Crowd control used to be the old saying, you had bats and hats. That was the only devices law enforcement had to use. Now we use other measures. Sunday, same thing is where they began pouring accelerants on the ground and lighting that on fire, and then they started burglarizing and vandalizing the 501 building. That was the triggering event. As long as they're peaceful, we're there to protect them. But we have to address the crime by the rule of law. We have to have the rule of law. And then Monday, what we really saw was more aggression from the protesters. They became more confrontational. They had measures to defeat if they did have to apply any kind of chemical agent. The main thing that we saw was, they just really aggressively came to us. We didn't approach, we always give them plenty of time to disperse. We give them 5 to 8 warnings over a period of 5 to 8 minutes and try to get their compliance. But when they start charging law enforcement and start assaulting us with rocks or pouring beer on our officers and doing different things, we have to take the appropriate action. We're not going to use excessive force. We're committed to that because of character and integrity. We're going to do the right thing. And then Tuesday night, where they went away from the Capitol and started breaking windows and things like that, we were able to, if I could, the next slide, if we could hit. Well, we're finding from Tuesday night, and then we found some yesterday, or Monday night, excuse me, these, where they busted the windows, these are incinerated devices. It's a water bottle filled with pure alcohol, and it's like a M80 firecracker. It's basically a Molotov cocktail. They tried to set buildings on fire. We recovered, go ahead and back up one, please. We recovered another one yesterday. During Monday nights, they actually set buildings on fire. The state police responded with fire extinguishers so the fire department could get there. But, once we dispersed that crowd Monday night, they broke off into splinter groups and began violent acts all over the city. Go ahead and go to the next one. Last night, we recovered things before the protest started last night. That's a sprayer full of gasoline. use to start fires. What was very important last night, and it really helped, I believe, we saw vehicles where they're actually hiding bricks in the grass and the shrubs around the Capitol. They were pre-staging devices to cause the destruction. So these are some of the obstacles that the law enforcement is facing. Our job is to enforce the rule of law. We're sworn to, if we see a criminal law violation like that, we want to take action, appropriate action. Last night, there were no crowd-controlled devices used, anything. It was just they were taken into custody. They were at the mansion, reminded of the curfew. They chose not to do it, but we took no enforcement action. They were peaceful. We were trying to work with them and get that accomplished. I believe that's the last of the slides, but what we're going to do is, it was a great team effort last night. I want to applaud the officers. They show great restraint. We want them to be able to exercise their First Amendment rights as long as it's peaceful. And we will protect them while they're doing that. I think I've proved that here as 5.5 years of the Director of State Police, as many protests we've had here at the Capitol. So we're going to continue to protect those protesters. But again, for those who agitate, a lot of the people last night, what we saw were from the local area. We did some, I don't want to get in much detail, we did observe some vehicles from out-of-state tags that were inciting them. A lot of these people you'll see, I think in the press release come out later, they're young adults. Could be influenced easily, but they're very organized. They do counter surveillance on law enforcement, determine where we're set up, do different things. But without getting too much detail, I just want to assure the citizens of Arkansas, we're going to protect you for your First Amendment rights, but we're also going to protect our other citizens from crime, violence, or vandalism. Thank you, Governor.
And we have a limited amount of time, but we'll take a few questions.
When the executive order was signed, and then was there any delay between when it was signed and when it was publicly announced?
No, it was, first of all, it's a fairly, we activate the Guard, we sign the executive order. It's very similar to what we've done in previous circumstances, and that was signed yesterday afternoon and it was put up on the website. Yes?
We know at least 3 journalists were part of that group that was detained last night, so can you just tell us what your response is to that, and is there any kind of directive for law enforcement to follow when it comes to protecting journalists when they're out on the job?
Well, they need to be protected. I think we all know of one journalist who was harmed very severely the other night and went to the hospital, and so journalists is part of the responsibility of law enforcement to protect in these kind of circumstances, and we recognize that journalists have a job to do, and though they're out there reporting, and it's very important, so I applaud the journalists for that, and they should not be arrested, but they have to be identified, and when they're identified as a journalist, obviously they should go about their business. Yes?
How do you know those objects are from protesters? Is that just speculation?
Bill?
The rocks, one of my troopers was hit in the head with this and picked it up there at the Capitol on Monday night. These were in the same area where the vehicle was observed, where the person pulled the gun out and fired the 4 rounds. We have some great peaceful protesters. We do, and we respect that right. But I'm telling you, it has escalated. When you start staging bricks and you have incendiary devices trying to set buildings on fire, that's not peaceful.
Next question. Yes.
Can you go a little bit more into detail about the motivation of putting the state in a state of emergency? Is that going to be a continuing concern?
Well, I'll certainly lift that as soon as we're satisfied that there's not any risk to property or to people. And anytime you're having congregations of hundreds and thousands sometimes of protesters, you're going to have elements that come in. And so during that time, and it's been demonstrated, there needs to be a great law enforcement response and capability. And you saw the difference between Monday night and Tuesday night. Monday night, the elements that were violent did their damage, and I said that's not going to happen again, and so that's the reason that we brought in more, put in the unified command structure, We brought in more law enforcement support, assistance of the National Guard to make sure that we had the resources to protect people and property. Yes.
Have we seen any credible threats of any outside organization, Antifa, anybody else like that? And then also, too, have there been any out-of-state arrests made?
There has not been any out-of-state arrests made last night or in the previous night that I'm aware of, at least in central Arkansas. And the intelligence is that the out-of-state influencers are here, that they are helping to coordinate, and they're helping to motivate the violent elements. And so, whenever you're from out of state, somehow they have a means of getting other people arrested and not themselves. So they were certainly part of the element that encouraged the strife and the destructive behavior.
You said that there was a notable difference between Monday night and last night. Do you attribute that just to ramping up the numbers of law enforcement out there, or were they doing different tactics that you then saw protesters respond less?
Well, that's a very good question, and I mean, first of all, you did have an earlier curfew the second night, and then it's a combination of the curfew plus the law enforcement presence that was visible, and so the violent element knew that they're going to have a difficult time with that law enforcement presence, and it happened later, and we responded very quickly in contrast to previous occasions. But the other part of your point is they adjust their tactics as well, and so there's a lot of potential targets out there, and we have intelligence information as to whether it's a Target store or whether it is a mall that could be the target of looting or this violent element, and so we have to be prepared to deploy law enforcement very quickly, or to pre-position them based upon the information that we might have. But they adjust their tactics as well. One final question. Yes?
Can we get a remote question? Does it concern you that they're openly carrying a weapon in front of City Hall right now? Because I've got video of it, some of the protesters. City police went and talked to him because it is legal. He's legal, but he's walking around with it draped, hanging off of his shoulder.
Well, it's a concern, even though it is a right and they're doing it legally. It is still something that could provoke a response that we have to worry about, or it could be misused. So certainly I have that concern. One question remotely.
Hi, Governor, this is Maureen Glisnick with KTV. I wanted to ask you about just the jurisdiction under the state police and state of emergency. It was reported to us last night that a worker from Arkansas Children's Hospital was driving home and was pulled over by a state police trooper, and it was for violating curfew. It was around 10:05 p.m. She showed her hospital credentials, and it took a security guard from Children's to meet her at the site to prove that the credentials weren't fake. So what are people's rights at this point, especially with the curfew in the city of Little Rock, and what are people supposed to do? Can they get pulled over just for violating curfew?
Maureen, this is Bill Bryant with the State Police. I just made aware of the incident a while ago. We'll fully investigate it, but the Arkansas State Police has jurisdiction statewide. We have, in all 75 counties, we have the law enforcement authority. I'm afraid to comment or guess, speculate, but what we'll do is we'll get our public information officer after this to get with you, and we'll research the matter and be glad to get back to you.
All right, thank you. We have...
Okay, but can you tell me, are we going to get pulled over for violating curfew? That's what I'd like to know. I think people need to know that.
No, ma'am, that's not going to be our standard practice. Just like last night, we could have stopped everybody in the city of Little Rock. We didn't. I don't know the circumstances, what caused that, but I think we've been very generous, and the governor and I share the same philosophy. If you're peaceful and doing it, you're not going to attract the attention of law enforcement.
Thank you all very much. We'll reconvene shortly for the COVID report. Thanks, Eddie. Take a break. Jeff, you can leave that the same. Let's just leave it that way. I want to see this one.
Yeah, I was like, I knew where to get to. Bears and all that.
Yeah, Chris, that's right. Both of them really stressed that they want to protect the rights of protesters, but they will not tolerate violent acts or destruction. And they said, throughout the day, the protests were mostly peaceful, and even when that 8 o'clock curfew came, things were so peaceful and all